You know, for a lot of nonprofit leaders, filing that annual IRS Form 990 feels like crossing the finish line for compliance. But here's the thing, it's actually just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Today, we're going to uncover the critical and often misunderstood connection between your federal tax return and your state fundraising registrations. This explainer is part of the Multi-State Fundraising Compliance series, where we try to make these complex regulatory topics really clear and practical. And today's resource is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations. Okay, so let's get right to the big question. Your Form 990 is done, it's filed with the IRS, and you feel that huge sense of relief, right? Well, if you're fundraising, that relief might be a little premature. Thinking the 990 is the final step is honestly one of the most common and riskiest compliance misconceptions out there. And look, this isn't just about some extra paperwork. Misunderstanding the connection between your federal and state filings can have some very real consequences. We're talking about missed renewal deadlines, which could stop your fundraising campaigns in their tracks, or even getting those unexpected and stressful inquiries from a state regulator. So to clear this all up, we really need to look at these as two totally distinct systems, each with its own job to do. Let's break down the fundamentals of both of them.
Let's break this down. The Form 990, on one hand, is a federal information return. You file it with the IRS, and its whole purpose is federal tax transparency. On the other hand, a state registration is a pre-solicitation requirement. You file that with a state agency like the Attorney General or Secretary of State. Its purpose is to regulate your fundraising before you even start asking for money. So you see, they serve fundamentally different roles.
Okay, so if they're so different, where does all the confusion come from? Well, it comes from the fact that these two separate systems do have one crucial point where they connect. The process itself is where you really see that connection. First, you file your Form 990 with the IRS, just like you always do. Then, and this is the key link, you take a complete copy of that 990 and you attach it to your separate state renewal form. Finally, that entire package goes to the state. The 990 is basically acting as a key piece of financial evidence for the state.
So here's the most important point. Your Form 990 is an attachment to your state filing. It's not a replacement for it. Just sending the 990 to a state by itself doesn't fulfill your annual registration requirement. You've still got to complete the state's own specific renewal paperwork. Now let's dig in a little deeper, because beyond just the process, there are some critical differences in the details, and this is where even the most organized nonprofits can get tripped up.
First, deadlines. They don't always align. Your Form 990 might be due 4.5 months after your fiscal year ends, but a state could require its renewal on a completely different date. Second, revenue definitions. The IRS calculates revenue one way, but a state might define it differently to decide if you need an audit. And finally, the triggers are different. The IRS cares about your tax-exempt status. States, they care about the moment you start asking for donations, a process called solicitation.
Right, so these differences naturally lead to some very common and honestly pretty dangerous assumptions. Let's go ahead and debunk a couple of the biggest ones we hear all the time.
This one is a classic. It makes perfect sense, right? Your accountant handles your tax forms, so you must be all set.
But that's not always the case. In fact, it's usually not. A CPA's job is typically for federal tax prep. Managing dozens of different state charity registrations is a completely separate, specialized service. It is absolutely crucial to confirm that this is explicitly included in your agreement, because most of the time, it isn't.
And here's another one that just seems so intuitive. A nonprofit might think, well, we haven't actually gotten any money from that state yet, so we don't need to register there.
But the law is really focused on the ask. The moment you solicit donations, and that could be through your website's donate button, an email campaign, a social media post, you may be triggering a registration requirement in any state where that appeal is seen. It's about the act of soliciting, not just about receiving the funds.
So why is getting this coordination right so important? Well, it becomes absolutely essential as your organization gets bigger and your fundraising footprint expands.
You see, as your revenue goes up, states start to become more demanding. When you're small, a lot of states are perfectly fine just accepting your Form 990 as your financial report. But as you cross certain revenue thresholds, they might start requiring reviewed financials, and then at even higher levels, a full independent audit. This escalation is driven entirely by state rules, and it's tied directly to your growth.
So, how do you stay on top of all this? It really is all about proactive coordination. First off, try to align your Form 990 prep timeline with your various state renewal deadlines. Every single year, you should check your revenue against each state's audit thresholds to see if your requirements have changed.
And don't forget, if you ever have to amend your Form 990, you'll probably need to send that amended copy to the states as well.
If you take just one thing away from this whole explainer, please let it be this. Federal tax compliance does not replace state fundraising compliance. They are connected, for sure, but they are not interchangeable. Managing one does not automatically take care of the other.
And that really leads us to the final question for you to take back and think about. Take a good look at your own internal processes. Do you have a clear strategy that makes sure your federal tax filing and your state fundraising registrations are working together, in harmony? Because getting this right allows your team to focus less on paperwork and more on what really matters, your mission.